button? The old man in the photograph didn't smile. He never did. I noticed that detail the first time I really looked at the picture. Not the glance you give something hanging on a wall for 20 years, but the kind of looking you do when someone is gone and you're searching their face for answers they never gave you while they were alive. He was standing in front of a building I didn't recognize, wearing civilian clothes, arms at his sides, eyes somewhere past the camera. Not sad, not proud, just still. The way he always was. The photograph had been sitting in a box in my trunk for 3 weeks. I kept meaning to take it inside. I kept finding reasons not to. My grandmother had pulled it out of her coat pocket the morning of the funeral and pressed it into my hands without a word. "Take this," she said. "You're the only one who'll understand it someday." I didn't ask what she meant. You don't ask those kinds of questions at gravesides. My uncle Raymond died on a Tuesday in February, alone in a VA hospital room in eastern Pennsylvania, which is exactly the kind of ending he would have expected. He was 67 years old. He had no wife, no children, no savings account worth mentioning. He drove a truck that was older than I was, paid cash for everything, and lived in the same rented house outside Scranton for 19 years without ever hanging a single picture on the wall. My family treated him the way people treat a piece of furniture they've stopped noticing. He was just there. Then he wasn't. My mother, his sister, found out he was hospitalized from a voicemail he left her 3 days before he died. She listened to it, set her phone face down on the kitchen counter, and said she'd call him back after dinner. She didn't. My aunt, who lived 40 minutes away from the VA, said she would have visited, but she didn't want to deal with the parking. My cousins didn't go at all. Too busy, they said. You know how it is. I drove 4 hours from Baltimore the moment I heard. I found him in a room at the end of a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and old carpet. He was awake. Barely. He turned his head when I came in, and something in his face changed. Not surprise exactly, more like the careful lowering of a wall he'd been holding up for a long time. "You came," he said. "Of course I came," I told him. He was quiet for a moment. "Your mother?" I said I wasn't sure she'd make it in time. That was the kindest way I knew to say no. He nodded like he already knew. "That's all right," he said. "It's all right." Those were almost the last words he ever said to me clearly. He passed away 2 days later in the early morning while I was asleep in the chair beside him. The nurse who woke me was gentle about it. I sat there for a while before I called anyone. When I finally called my mother, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Well, he lived his life his way, I suppose." That was it. No offer to help with arrangements. No asking what he would have wanted. No asking where he would be buried. I made every decision alone. Small service, small cemetery. A gray morning in March that felt appropriate in all the wrong ways. My grandmother came. 2 men came who said they'd known Raymond, though they didn't say how or from where. My mother sent flowers with a card that said, "Thinking of you." Not of him. Of me. I stood by the grave holding a folded order of service I'd printed myself and thought, this man deserved better than this. I just didn't fully understand yet how much better. After the service, I went to Raymond's house. The landlord had given me a week before he needed the place cleared out. It wasn't a difficult job. Raymond owned almost nothing. Clothes, some books on history and geography, a small television, canned goods lined up neatly in the kitchen cabinet. He had lived as though he was always prepared to leave on short notice and leave nothing behind. In the back of his bedroom closet, inside an old shoebox tucked behind a pair of boots he'd never worn down, I found a patch. It wasn't sewn onto anything. It was just loose, wrapped in a square of brown cloth, the kind of cloth you'd use to clean eyeglasses. The patch itself was small, maybe 2 inches across. Dark background, no text, no flag, no branch insignia. Just a symbol I didn't recognize. Angular. Precise. The kind of thing that looked like it had been designed to mean something specific to a very small number of people. I remembered seeing it once before. Years ago, when Raymond had rolled up his sleeve to help me move a couch, there was a faded tattoo on his inner forearm. Same symbol. I'd asked about it. He'd smiled and rolled his sleeve back down. "Old story," he said, "not worth telling." I put the patch in my pocket and kept packing boxes. I didn't think about it again for almost a month. Life resumed. Work, routines, the ordinary machinery of getting through. But something about Raymond's house kept drifting back to me. The neatness of it, the deliberate blankness of the walls, the way every drawer was organized as if he knew someone might go through it someday and he wanted them to find nothing. It wasn't the mess of a man who'd given up. It was the order of a man who'd been careful for a very long time. Raymond was a veteran. I knew that much. He'd served in the army, and at some point after that he'd worked for the government in some capacity he never explained. When I was a teenager and asked him about it directly, he said, "Desk work, nothing interesting." Then he changed the subject with a skill that, looking back, was almost impressive. My family took him at his word. My mother always said Raymond made himself mysterious to seem important, that it was a habit he'd developed because his real life hadn't lived up to whatever he'd imagined for himself. She said it the way you say something you've decided is true because the alternative is more complicated. I never fully believed her, but I hadn't pushed hard enough to find out why. The moment that changed everything happened at a federal building in Washington, D.C., on a gray April morning 6 weeks after Raymond's funeral. I work in government contracting. It's not exciting. Mostly I sit in conference rooms and review procurement documents and occasionally attend briefings that are slightly more important than they sound. That April, I was at a 2-day interagency conference, the kind with lanyards and name badges and coffee that's always slightly too cold. I was wearing Raymond's patch pinned to the inside of my jacket lapel. I'd started doing that after the funeral. I can't fully explain why. It felt like carrying something of him without making a statement about it. No one had ever noticed. Until the second morning of the conference. I was standing near the windows during a break, looking at my phone, when I became aware of someone standing very close to me who hadn't been there a moment before. I looked up. The man was in his late 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that doesn't come from a gym. He was wearing a suit with no visible badge. He was looking at my lapel. Not at my face. At the lapel. His expression was completely controlled except for one thing. His jaw had tightened in a way that looked involuntary. "Is that yours?" he asked. His voice was low. Completely even. "My uncle's," I said. "He passed away recently." Something moved behind the man's eyes. "What was his name?" "Raymond Cutler," I said. The man was silent for 3 full seconds. Then he said, quietly, "I think we need to speak privately." And the way he said it, without urgency, without drama, just with absolute certainty that I would agree, told me this was not a casual request. We found an empty room off the main corridor. He closed the door. He didn't offer me his name right away. He sat across from me and looked at the patch for a moment, the way you look at something you thought was gone from the world. "How long have you had this?" he asked. "I found it when I was clearing out his things," I said. "After the funeral." "Do you recognize it?" He looked up from the patch to me. "Yes," he said. "How?" He considered that for a moment. "I worked in the same program your uncle did," he said, "for a long time." "What program?" He folded his hands on the table. "There are units within the intelligence community that don't have names in any public document," he said, "that exist specifically because certain kinds of work cannot be acknowledged. Your uncle was part of one of those units for nearly 15 years. I stared at him. "Raymond," I said. I heard how it sounded before the word was fully out, disbelieving in a way that made me ashamed. The man didn't react to my tone. He simply said, "Raymond Cutler was one of the most effective people I ever worked with." I was quiet for a moment. "My family thought he was nothing," I said. "My mother said he invented his own importance." He nodded slowly. "That's not uncommon," he said. "When someone can't explain their work and they don't ask to be believed, people tend to fill in the gap with the least generous interpretation." "What did he do?" I asked. He was careful in how he answered. "Operational support. Intelligence gathering. There were periods, 2-3 years at a time, when Raymond was the only reason certain things held together in places you wouldn't expect. He paused. I can't be more specific than that right now. Why not? Because some of it is still active, he said simply. I looked down at the patch in my hands. My throat felt tight. He died alone in a VA hospital, I said. His own sister didn't come. I know, the man said. He knew that would be the likely outcome. He accepted it. He accepted being forgotten. He accepted being forgotten. He accepted the cost of what he chose to do. Those aren't the same thing. That sentence stayed with me for a long time. On the drive back that evening, I turned it over and over. He accepted the cost. Not resigned, not broken. Accepted. The way Raymond always seemed at family gatherings, sitting on the edge of the room with a glass of water, watching everyone else the way you watch a movie you've already seen. Not bored, just already knowing how it ends. I had always thought there was something sad about the way he existed near our family without being part of it. I was starting to understand it differently. The man's name, I learned 2 days later when he called me, was Warren Feld. He had spent 30 years in a government intelligence division that he still didn't name directly. He had known Raymond since the mid-90s. He called because, he said, there was something he wanted me to understand, not to expose, not to make public, just to understand. We met at a coffee shop near Union Station. He arrived before me and was already sitting with his hands wrapped around a cup when I walked in. He looked smaller without the conference lanyard, more like someone's retired grandfather than whatever he'd been for 3 decades. I want to tell you about your uncle, he said when I sat down. Not the official version, because there isn't one, but the real one. I listened. Raymond had joined the army at 19. He'd been quietly moved into intelligence work within 2 years because of a combination of skills: languages, pattern recognition, an ability to go unnoticed in almost any environment that were apparently rare enough to make the right people pay attention. After his service, he'd been recruited into a civilian intelligence program that worked alongside the military in areas where official involvement was, as Warren put it, politically complicated. He spent years moving through Eastern Europe, Central America, the Gulf region. Not fighting, watching, connecting people who needed to be connected, warning people who needed to be warned, extracting people who needed to be extracted before anyone official knew they were in danger. He had no official cover, no embassy affiliation, no government employee ID he could show if something went wrong. If something goes wrong, Raymond had once told Warren, that's a problem I handle on my own. For 15 years, almost nothing went wrong. When it did, Raymond had handled it the way Warren described as impossibly calm. There had been a situation. Warren still didn't specify what or where in which Raymond had taken on exposure that should have belonged to 2 other people in order to protect them. He'd spent several months in circumstances Warren still didn't describe clearly. And when it was over, Raymond had come home, rented that house in Scranton, and lived quietly until he died. He never asked for anything? I said. He asked for one thing, Warren said. He asked for the record of what happened to be kept somewhere. Not publicly, not officially, just somewhere. So someone would know. Warren reached into his jacket pocket and placed a plain white envelope on the table between us. He specified you, Warren said, by name. Years ago, he told me that if anything ever needed to be passed on, it went to you. Not your mother. Not your grandmother. You. My hands were unsteady when I picked up the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten in the careful, slightly old-fashioned script I recognized from birthday cards Raymond had sent me every year without fail. Even the years no one else remembered. It said, if you're reading this, then Warren found you, which means I didn't have the chance to explain in person. I want you to know that the life I lived was the life I chose. Not because my family didn't matter to me, because they did. Everything I did so that people I would never meet could live safely and have the ordinary things: dinners, birthdays, arguments about nothing, children who ask too many questions. I hope you have all of those things. I hope you ask the questions. I never could, but you can. That was always the difference between us. Don't let them make you quiet. The world needs fewer quiet ones than it thinks it does. I sat in that coffee shop for a long time after Warren left. I thought about the birthday cards. Every year, without fail. Even after we'd moved 3 times, even the year I didn't write back, how had he always known where to send them? I'd never thought to wonder. That night, I drove to my mother's house. I didn't call ahead. She was in the kitchen when I came in, and she read something in my expression before I spoke because she went still in the way she does when she's preparing for bad news. I put Raymond's letter on the table in front of her, then the patch, then 3 pages of notes I'd written down after my conversation with Warren, as much as I could remember. She read slowly. Her coffee went cold. When she finished, she set the pages down and looked at the wall for a while. Then she said, "I thought he was performing. All those years. I thought he was performing depth because he didn't have any. He had more depth than anyone in this family," I said. I didn't say it to wound her, but I didn't soften it either. She pressed her lips together. "Why didn't he tell us?" "You didn't ask," I said. "And even when he hinted, you decided what the answer was before you heard it." "That's not fair," she said. "Mom," I said, "he called you 3 days before he died. You said you'd call him back after dinner." She closed her eyes. We sat in silence for a long time. My aunt came over later that evening because my mother called her, which I hadn't expected. My 2 cousins arrived within the hour. We sat at the kitchen table and I went through everything again, slower this time, watching their faces change. My younger cousin, who was 22 and had once made a joke at Christmas about Raymond being too boring to have secrets, sat with her hands flat on the table and didn't speak for almost 10 minutes after I finished. Then she said, "I made fun of him once to his face. I didn't think he heard me." "He didn't react." "He probably heard you," I said. She nodded. "I know." My mother asked if she could hold the patch. I gave it to her and watched her turn it over in her hands the way I had, looking at the symbol she'd spent her whole life walking past without ever asking what it meant. "I want to do something," she said. "Something real." What she did was small. What she did was right. She contacted the VA and arranged for Raymond's grave marker to be updated, not with anything classified, not with any unit name or mission designation, just with the additional line, "Served in intelligence work, 1987 to 2004. It took 3 months to process. She drove to Pennsylvania the day it was installed and stood there alone for an hour before she called me. She said, "I owe him 20 years of better than I gave him. I can't pay that back. But I can start." I believed her. Not because people change easily. Because I heard something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not guilt exactly, but the specific weight of someone who has stopped making excuses. That weight changes a person. I know it because I felt it too. I had been there for Raymond more than the rest of them, but I had still let years pass between phone calls. I had still sometimes declined his invitations because I was tired from the week. I had still assumed there would be more time. Warren called me one more time, about 2 months after our coffee shop meeting. He was brief. He said there were people still alive who had been helped by Raymond's work, people who had built ordinary lives in ordinary places because Raymond had been where he was when he was. None of them knew his name. None of them could be told. But they were there, going about their days, having the ordinary things. I think about that sometimes when I'm caught up in what feels urgent. The unbothered Tuesday afternoons that only exist because someone, somewhere, a long time ago, made a choice in a place no one was watching. I still have the patch. I still wear it sometimes, pinned on the inside of a lapel where most people won't see it. My grandmother, who is 81 and sharper than anyone gives her credit for, noticed it last Thanksgiving and said without looking up from her plate, "He would have liked that you wear that." I said I thought he would too. She nodded. "He was proud of you." Never said it out loud, but I knew. That's the thing about the quiet ones. They're always communicating. You just have to learn how to listen. Most of us never bother to learn until it's too late, and then we spend the rest of our lives fluent in a language there's no one left to speak with. I'm still learning. I'm learning to call people back the same day, to sit with someone who isn't performing their importance at you and understand that stillness is not emptiness, to let a question stay in the air instead of filling it with the answer I've already decided on. Raymond spent his life protecting people from dangers they never saw. The least I can do is protect his memory from the silence that almost buried it. If you're listening to this and feeling something familiar, a face you haven't called, an invitation you let expire, a quiet person you've been meaning to make time for, please don't wait until there's a letter you didn't know existed, and a stranger in a conference room, and an envelope that took 20 years to reach you. Go now. Ask the question. Stay long enough to hear the answer. The quiet ones are always talking. They're just waiting to see if anyone is actually listening.